This shit is real in the field, so I keep it still. This shit is real in the field, so I keep it still. This shit is real in the field, so I keep it still. You throw up an L, you see how it feels.
All right. This is the Real in the Field Goals podcast. I added the goals today. I figured go Real in the Field Goals. It's almost like makes sense. But I'm Kenneth Arthur, and with me, as most of the time, is Danny Kelly. What's up, Danny?
What's going on?
And today, for the third installment of Real in the Field, we have Rob Staton, all the way from. Am I saying that right, Rob? Have I always been saying that yet? Just Staton?
It's actually Staton.
Staton.
But a lot of people made that mistake. An interesting story, very briefly. Candy Staton is often referred to as Candy Staton. I know someone who interviewed her once, and she said, yeah, everybody's been getting it wrong for years. So I've kind of just come to learn that it doesn't really matter.
What's the foil that you put on, like, cookie sheets, or what's the foil that you put on, like, food to keep it fresh?
Tin foil.
Okay, what about aluminum foil?
Oh, aluminium foil. That's what you meant.
Can we just do this whole thing being Britishisms? Like, just making fun of Britishisms?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting those, because I'm sure Staten. It sounds like it feels like Staten is an American thing, where I think there's got like, you know, we have the word like Baton Rouge, for example. That's what, maybe it's Baton Rouge. I don't know. This is definitely.
I like how the British also kind of like anglicize a lot of French words, whereas Americans try and say it in French. The British don't even bother. They're just like a fillet or a valet.
Right.
We try and Frenchify it up. The British are like, screw that. We're gonna say it in English.
Do you agree with that, Rob? Do you say fillet?
I definitely say fillet.
Fillet.
Wow.
A valet.
Isn't that like, I think like in Alabama, like that's like Mobile, Alabama. I don't know. There's definitely like different parts of America do it too. And this is definitely what we're going to be talking about on this Seahawks podcast.
This is the best intro of all time.
Absolutely. We are going to talk about football. We're going to talk about the combine. You know, it's not for everybody. It's not for me. I would go, definitely, because I think it's interesting. But I have been vehemently opposed to the importance of the combine, and I won't stand back on that. But I am interested to know what Danny Kelly thinks, because Danny, for the first time in his life, I believe, went to Indianapolis to go to the combine. What was it, 4-day experience?
Yeah, I was there from Tuesday all the way to Friday, essentially. I left Saturday morning at like 4 in the morning.
A little more than a week. Or no,
yeah,
a little more than half a week.
Yeah.
So, compared to all the other years where you just absorbed the tweets or the news, what was it like going to the combine for the first time?
It was really cool, actually. You know, they put you in this media area, and they have all these podiums set up, and they kind of filter people through all day long, so it's a little bit chaotic. And so doing, you know, writing and trying to go to some of the press conferences and interview some of the players. It was really cool, though. It was it's like you kind of sit there trying to write an article or a story, and then over the loudspeaker, you know, the PR people will call out, you know, Jameis Winston or any of these other people, Marcus Mariota, and then everyone like gets up and like runs over to the podium and tries to get in questions. It's like an ongoing press conference for, you know, 4 days straight. With a little downtime in between, but
so it's really about press conferences over the actual events.
Yeah, so we didn't actually go into the stadium. We're in like we're in the stadium proper, but we're not in like the field area. The press are only allowed on the field during the quarterback workouts, and those are the Pro Football Writers of America are only the ones that are allowed down there. So I didn't actually go on the field or anything like that. They'd limit that to mostly scouts and teams, obviously, but the media sort of area is where all the press conferences and interviews take place, and so that's where we were sort of sequestered into. Yeah.
Were there moments where they would just be like, Marcus Mariota, 4, 5, 7, 40, and then people be like, there'd be like a hush over the crowd, like people would be listening in, or did you
No.
you were not even cognizant of what was happening? You'd read the reports later like everyone else.
Well, they didn't even really start doing much of the testing of the interesting positions until I think Friday. And so Friday was my last day there. And so honestly, the media room just had the NFL Network on, and people were just watching it on TV essentially. So it's a little different than you might imagine. We're not like down on the field with stopwatches, like
Right.
trying to figure out like how close the official time was to our time or anything like that. It was more like the media have a setup so they can ask questions and stuff like that. They're not actually there to try and evaluate the players in terms of their athleticism and stuff.
So would there be any one of the 4 days that was like your favorite day to be there, or was it all just pretty much business? And
I like talking to the running back groups. I thought, because I kind of had different goals every day that I was down there, and one of my goals was to talk to the linemen, and that was the first day, and so I talked to them a lot, and then talk to the running backs and try and get an idea of just the process and things like that. So I'd say those 2 days were the best, and then the other days, I mean, a lot of the time you just spend writing. You're just in there kind of typing away, and then whenever you hear a name that you want to talk to, then you run over, and so it's just kind of chaotic.
Goals or goals?
Goals.
You had goals every week.
Yeah, I don't think I know the difference between those two words anymore.
No,
I don't think I ever say field goals at all.
Field goals. Rob, I'm sure that you probably like to go to the Combine perhaps at some point. Is there any questions that you have for Danny as far as his experiences, or anything as far as maybe something you've been curious about, assuming, of course, that you have not yet been able to attend a Combine?
Yeah, I've not been to a Combine. I think the most curious thing I've always been about it is, as a journalist for the BBC in England, I always wonder exactly what the media do who are there, because there's obviously a lot of guys who are there who are to write stories or interview players, or to come away, having spoken to Jameis Winston, or cover the Dorial Green Beckham story or something like that. But there's also a lot of media who are kind of draft media, aren't they? And they go along and they want to be able to say they've been, and maybe they do a blog or whatever. So do all those guys, are they just sort of shut away while the workouts are going on? Are you watching it on a TV screen? What exactly, if you want to watch the drills, is it easy, Danny?
No, I mean, you really have to just watch it on TV. It's kind of funny that way. I think there's the one thing the media can get down on the field for is the quarterbacks, and those are only people like card carrying Pro Football Writers of America guys are able to go down there. So I think I was gone by the time they did their workouts anyway. So, but yeah, mostly it's honestly the media function at the Combine is to interview players, not to do anything that has to do with their on-field like workouts and stuff like that. So that's kind of the angle.
There is one other thing I want to ask you is, what did you say to Pete Prisco?
It was great. We at the Combine, everybody kind of hangs out in this one bar in the JW Marriott lobby. And so I ran into the CBS guys, Will Brinson and Pete Prisco, and it was cool. It was just we just literally talked about Russell Wilson for about an hour, and we're all kind of drinking, and so it was mostly in good fun. And he kind of was like, he was saying it tongue in cheek, the whole Mona Lisa thing. He's been on record saying he doesn't think Wilson's elite or like a whatever top 5 quarterback, and but he kind of was like, we were kind of just joking around, like, oh, tweet this, it'll get everybody fired up. And sure enough, when I tweeted that he had said that Russell Wilson's the Mona Lisa of quarterbacks, overrated, it had like this crazy, like for like an hour straight, it was just like we were both getting blown up with people.
He loves it.
Yeah, he thought it was funny. So,
that's the most frustrating thing about guys like Pete Prisco. It's not so much that they're jerks or whatever. It's because that's all in fun and it's all perspective. It's the fact that unlike the rest of us, they thrive off of people hating on them.
Yeah, I mean and I told him whenever I've heard him on the radio or doing some of his video stuff, he seems very level-headed and rational for the most part, and you don't always agree with him, but he explains why he feels that way. But then on Twitter, I told him this. I'm like, you just like to jab at people, and I think it's like he's just looking for a rise. He's looking to get a rise out of people, especially Seahawks fans, because they pretty much all hate Prisco. So, but he's aware of all that, and he's just kind of like rolls with it, thinks it's kind of funny. I mean, I think on some level, I think he really believes what he's saying, but he's also saying it in a manner to kind of rile people up, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it is interesting when you meet people who have personas, and they have online personas, and then you meet them and realize that they're real people, and like most of the time it really is just like a persona, and they're just like, oh hey, I'm a normal guy, and you're just talking about football because obviously he's a football fan. It's just, I definitely don't agree with everything he says. And then there's, like the guys like, when people get mad at guys like Skip Bayless, and it's like, you do realize that Skip Bayless is nailing his job. Yeah. Like, he is dominating what he's asked to do because people talk about it and people tune in to those stupid shows.
God. Yeah.
And at record numbers. So they're absolutely killing what they're supposed to be doing. And, so that's definitely the people that I met along the road this year were, for the most part, really nice people that, just it's hard when someone says something bad about people that you like and you're like, you're just not saying it right or whatever, but it so doesn't even really matter. As far as the actual players at the Combine, Rob, for you, who was a couple guys that like athletically popped off in a way that has you taking a second look at them?
Well, it's pretty obvious because the two guys who maybe we didn't know an awful lot about before the Combine was Chris Conley at Georgia, who just had an incredible workout, and then Byron Jones, who didn't run the 40-yard dash. He was a cornerback, but had an incredible 12-3 in the broad jump, great vertical jump, did everything well. Looked okay in the drills that he did, just didn't run. So I'm waiting to see him run, and if he runs in the 4.3s or 4.4s, he's going to go high. I think his nickname at Connecticut is the Senator, or Senator Jones, or something like that. So
that's awesome.
That he has great character. And actually, when you have a chance, you go back and you see a couple of games, and there is one UConn game available, and you look, and good coverage in some instances. But other cases, you'd think, well, if that was the NFL, he'd get burned or he'd get flagged. So it's kind of hit and miss, but the potential is obvious. And when there are teams out there who are looking for quarterbacks every year in the draft, then he's going to go early if he tests well, because people will feel like they can coach him up. So he's someone to go and have a look at. And then Chris Conley at Georgia, a guy who you kind of remember when you watch all the Georgia games. I mean, over here we get about 4 to 5 games every week during the college football season, and Georgia seemed to be on every single weekend. And you kind of remember him, but you never for a second think, oh, this is a guy who stands out. And then you go back and you look at a couple of games. He made some really good plays for Georgia last year, and showed that he can be a really technically gifted receiver as well as an athletic freak. So you have to go back and look at him. He needs a lot of refinement. I think that's the one thing you would say. His route running is atrocious at times. Just gets himself in the wrong position, or just didn't get the call. But then there are other times when he gets into awkward catching positions. So some technical development there, but in terms of athleticism, just incredible. They're the two obvious ones. But then, you go further down the list. There's a guy like Henry Anderson at Stanford who just had an incredible Senior Bowl, and then had one of the most athletic combines. At 290 pounds, he's probably going to get up to about 300 when he gets to the NFL. He's 6'6". Just an incredible workout from him, and a lot of other similar guys like that. The cornerbacks, Alex Carter, Eric Rowe, performed very well. I thought that Ty Sambrailo has been linked quite heavily with Seattle, moved well, and that's the big thing with him. He's a mobile guard prospect, and when you sort of see I think he benched him at like 23, and there was some concern there, which is okay. It's only 2 less than Jake Fisher, so there was a lot of positivity to come out of this combine.
You mentioned Alex Carter, and you compared him in your latest article to Richard Sherman, maybe not like 1-to-1, but you did say that these guys are physically the same. They do have similarities. Is there any? Do you think that that's a possibility of a guy that they can take and sort of put next to Sherman and say, mold this guy. And also you mentioned the 32-inch arms and how the Seahawks haven't drafted a corner with. Do you think that if they drafted a corner with arms with the wings under 32 inches, would you be like flabbergasted? Are you really sold that, that basically you scratch off the draft board anyone under 32-inch arms?
Well, only because it will be the first time that it happens if Seattle drafts a guy with 32-inch arms. So that's the only reason why I would look at that. Obviously, wingspan is just as important as the arm length. So if a guy is maybe 31.5 inches tall, long in that sense, then maybe it's a consideration as well. But it's something we have to look at. In terms of Alex Carter, he's not similar. It's not a similar physical player because he's 6 foot rather than 6'3". He's a similar weight to Sherman, but he's thick. You look at him; he's very muscular, a little bit more stouter than Richard Sherman. So a different physical type of player. But the one similarity that they have is when you watch Sherman in his final year at Stanford. I remember watching them play Arizona when Nick Foles was there, and I think he had memory serves. He had this fantastic interception in the game. He had a couple of really big plays that stood out. And he had 3 or 4 plays where he just looked horrendous. And that was Richard Sherman at Stanford. Potential there. But it was so hit and miss. And then he gets to Seattle, and obviously the brilliant coaching, the determination of Sherman to become the player that he has shone through. Carter is faster. Carter is stouter. He looks more muscular. Sherman's very lean, isn't he? He's almost. Yeah. Whereas Carter is muscular. He's built. And that may mean that he's a little bit more stiff than Sherman. But the fact is that he's long, he's got the arm length, he's got the height, he's got the speed. He had a 40-inch vertical, so he's explosive. His shuttle was great as well. So he ticks a lot of the boxes. I think he's getting a little bit overrated. I think people are responding to his combine because the general quarterback class is not brilliant at the top end. And I'm seeing him getting projected now in sort of day 2 and round 2 and round 3. I think that's a little bit rich. I wouldn't want to take him in that kind of range, but when he gets to round 4 and 5, if he's still there, then he should be an option for Seattle.
Danny, you did mention liking the time that you spent with the running backs of the combine. I also remember you seemed pretty amped up about a few of the guys on Twitter that day. Is there anyone that you sort of talked to as far as the running back class that got you sort of develop a bit of a draft crush on?
Yeah, and I mean, I went in kind of trying to talk to guys that I thought the Seahawks might have interest in, and so I talked to Mike Davis out of South Carolina, and he was a really good interview. He was very honest and engaging, and sort of he had a good affect about him. It wasn't uncomfortable because some of these guys, it's like you can't get anything out of them. It's like they sit there and answer with a one-word answer, or like if you ask them to compare themselves, they'll just say, "Oh, I don't compare myself to anyone but me." Yeah. And it's just like, it's like, thanks, I'll go write that. But he was really good, and he talked about how he likes Marshawn Lynch a lot, and he quipped at one point. I asked him if he had talked to I asked him who he compared himself to, and he said Marshawn Lynch just because the way he runs. He's like relentless. And then I said, "Oh, have you ever reached out to him to talk to him, or have you ever talked to him?" And he said no. And then he kind of looks at everyone around the table. He goes, "Have you guys?" And it was just kind of like this, like really, like he just kind of had that charisma that So in that sense, he was a good interview. And he also talked about how he came out to the NFL early because his mom, had gotten an eviction notice, and so he's trying to help her out, and because a lot of people thought he might benefit from going back for another year, but he's an interesting guy too for the Seahawks, and I think probably like the 3rd or the 4th round or something like that. I talked to Josh Robinson out of Mississippi State, and he was really charismatic and funny, and he had like the whole table cracking up pretty much the whole time. I think he talked to 710 yesterday at ESPN, and he had mentioned when I talked to him that he was going to meet with the Seahawks that night, and so I guess he told 710 yesterday that the Seahawks were one of 2 teams that he thought had genuine interest in him. So he's a guy to watch. I think he didn't run well. He had a 4.71, and that was kind of what people were expecting. He was going to be a little bit slow. And so, the Seahawks haven't exactly taken slow running backs since John Schneider and Pete Carroll got here, but maybe they're thinking of turning him into a fullback or something like that, because he's got that Mike Tolbert sort of body type where he's like really low to the ground and breaks a lot of tackles, but maybe isn't the top end athlete.
Did you get anything as far as rumors or hearsay or contact about the Seahawks while you were there? Specifically, John Schneider, anything as far as what it seemed like people were saying the Seahawks were looking at or where they were gravitating besides Josh Robinson, obviously?
No, I didn't really, nothing solid, obviously, that I could, talk about, but there were, there's scuttlebutt, obviously, about different things, and but no, nothing solid that I could actually mention, but
yeah. So it looks like as far as cornerbacks go and secondary goes, it wasn't long ago that the Seahawks, it would seem, other than replacing Byron Maxwell, crazy to assume that they would need help in the secondary, but in the matter of what seems like a day, we find out about injuries that were rather significant to Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman, and then obviously Jeremy Lane's his multitude of injuries, and then Maxwell is leaving, and then today also the news about Thorold Simon being injured as well. So it is now all of a sudden something that the Seahawks have to address as far as cornerbacks and safeties. Jerron Johnson could be leaving. So it looks like they're going to need someone, not just as a backup safety, but someone that might need to start at the beginning of the season if Earl Thomas isn't ready. And then obviously they're going to have to figure out who's going to start at cornerback opposite of Richard Sherman. So without getting into free agency or whatever, Danny, did you talk to any of the secondary players while you were at the Combine, or that was the days after you had left?
Yeah, that was the days after I had left, so I didn't get to chat with them. But there was a couple guys that obviously stood out and who are interesting. In addition to some of the guys that Rob had mentioned, Eric Rowe had a really good combine. He's a guy that the Seahawks probably could be interested in because he played a little bit of safety as well at Utah, and so he's a guy that it wouldn't be surprising to see the Seahawks sort of target him early on. USC's Josh Shaw had a really good combine. He ran really well, and he's a guy that he might not be an outside corner, but he could be one of those guys that plays free safety and or nickelback. And so he's a guy to keep in mind. And then another guy that has been sort of on people's, he's been talked about on Twitter and things like that is Penn State's Adrian Amos, and he's a guy that also played sort of multiple positions for Penn State. And the Seahawks tend to like those guys, guys that can offer value at both corner and safety. And that's kind of something they need right now, especially with Maxwell and Johnson potentially both gone. So those are three guys that really stood out to me in terms of just looking at their numbers. And, obviously their tape had been good before the Combine. And now they're a little bit more interesting. Shaw, obviously he had that huge controversy or whatever this year where he told police that he was trying to save his drowning cousin or brother or something, and then turns out he was just running from the cops. But
it's like
or he was jumping out.
Like
he jumped out of the balcony.
You never know when you're running from the cops or saving someone's life. It can be either or. He probably just got confused.
Yeah, I misremembered.
Yeah. Rob, how would you? Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's all I had to say really about that.
Well, I was wondering, Rob, how Rob would compare maybe some of these prospects in the middle to the late range, and if you could sort of, I know it's been a year, but how would you compare, say, the viability of a Josh Shaw or an Adrian Amos to an Eric Pinkins, who's still on the roster and didn't play last year, but is another guy that they were, was safety cornered, moved around. Do you still think that Pinkins has a good shot at getting in on this roster for next year?
It's very hard to say because Pinkins kind of came out of nowhere, and the guy who knew about Eric Pinkins before the draft, I will doff my cap to them because he just came out from nowhere. He was someone they picked out who played, I think, safety in college, and they felt that they could turn him into a corner. He had the size and the speed, and we've seen so little of him. It's hard to compare. But I mean, my opinion on the whole cornerback thing is. I don't think there's any reason to panic. Yeah, there are injuries at the moment, but I think we all expect that Richard Sherman's going to come back and the two starting safeties back. Thomas has to miss a game or two. He's going to be there. I think that you look at this class, you don't reach. I saw a mock draft today which had Eric Rowe going to Seattle at 31, and I just don't think that the Seahawks are going to reach for a cornerback just because of the situation with Byron Maxwell. I mean, we're talking about the #1 defense in yardage and scoring for the last 2 years. Is it really going to collapse because of a few injuries and because Byron Maxwell's going to leave in free agency? I don't think it will. So I think what you're doing is you let the draft come to you, and if in the 4th or the 5th round someone like Alex Carter's there, or Rowe, or Amos, who is pretty big, he's 218 pounds for a cornerback, which is big. Or you just accept the situation, bring in a couple of stopgap veterans, not ideal. Will Blackman's been released. Maybe he comes back, somebody like that. A lot of people saying about Walter Thurman. I think he maybe burned a few bridges in Seattle. But just plug somebody in there, accept the situation as it is, bring in the next Pinkins in, find that physical ideal in the later rounds, bring them in, let them all compete. Let Terrell Simon compete as well. Just pick the best guy from camp and just go with it, because whenever you've got Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, the linebackers, Bruce Irvin making plays, Richard Sherman on one side, this defense is going to be great. So I don't think there's any need to panic at cornerback. Just let the draft come to you.
That's true, because, I mean, they were without Maxwell for a few games last year. They were without Browner 2 years ago, and they made it work. They were without Chancellor, and it wasn't ideal, but certainly they have ways of being prepared for this sort of thing. So you wouldn't think that they would necessarily – it would go against type for them to draft a cornerback in the first round or even the second round. They seem pretty confident. There are guys that they seem to draft, and you mentioned this in your article about trading down, but the guys that they draft a round or 2 rounds or maybe even 3 rounds ahead of time than what they were expected to, because they're comfortable and they don't really give a shit if somebody thinks that it's an overdraft. They just want to get the guys that fit the mold of what they want to do. So as far as guys that you see maybe them becoming a Bruce Irvin or an Eric Pinkins, it's hard to predict those surprises because that's where the surprise is. But is there anyone that you're seeing as far as someone that they might be comfortable drafting 2 rounds ahead of their projection?
Oh, absolutely. There's loads. And the thing last year is in round 4 they traded down twice to get Richardson, knowing they could get him in the position they could. Acquired 2 4th-round picks. They take Marsh, Norwood, and Pierre Lewis in the 4th round. I would guess, and we can't tell obviously, but I don't think any of those. There's a chance that none of those players go in round 4 if Seattle don't take them. They took them because they fit what Seattle was looking for. Obviously, Carroll had the history with Marsh as well. They took them when they wanted them to make sure that they got them. And they're going to do that again this year. They're going to pick around when they think they can get a cornerback. Okay, there's going to be one there in round 4. We'll manipulate the board. We'll take him a round or 2 earlier to make sure we get our guy. And they're going to probably have a list of players, and they're going to try and get as many players on that list as possible. And they're not going to care what anybody thinks. They're just going to do it. And there's a lot of people. I could see them taking Trey McBride, receiver, a little bit earlier than everybody else. Maybe I think he's getting graded in round 3 or 4. Maybe they trade down from 63 and take him at the top of round 3. Maybe they take him at 63. Zach Hodges at Harvard. I mean, Danny was talking about Robinson, the running back from Mississippi State, who's just got an incredible backstory. I love that guy. Just great character. But Zach Hodges has got a fantastic backstory as well. This is someone who lost his mother in high school, lost his father aged 6, lost his grandfather aged 14, and just through all of that adversity, fought his way to Harvard University, and just an explosive pass rusher, great 10-yard split. I could see the Seahawks taking him a bit earlier than some. I could see them taking someone like Lawrence Gibson, who only started at Virginia Tech as a tackle in 2014. But has got over 35 inch arms, 6'6", 305. Nearly got into the 4.9s in his 40. Great. I think he had the best vertical jump amongst defensive linemen. It was at the 33, 34-inch mark. Bit of a Garrett Scott type. I could see them taking him when maybe other teams give him an undrafted grade. Maybe he's going to go in rounds 4 to 6 type range. I could see them looking at Josh Shaw when other teams will just strike him off the board because he's a 4.4 runner at 201 pounds. He's somebody who could replace Jerron Johnson. Great vertical jump as well. That they will have that information there because of Carroll's contacts at USC. They'll find out exactly what this guy's all about. I could see them drafting him when other teams perhaps just write him off. Maybe they draft Nick Marshall, who's the quarterback at Auburn, to play cornerback because he's got arm length. Maybe he's somebody they just, when everybody else is just writing him off and saying, we'll consider it an undrafted free agent. Maybe they take him and just say, it's not a great class, and we're not going to reach for a Carter or a Rowe or an Amos in rounds 2, 3, or 4. We'll take Nick Marshall in round 6, and we'll just try and develop him. I could see something like that. I could see them drafting Buck Allen as a running back. I think out of all the running backs, he is maybe the most intriguing in the middle rounds because he's a great cutback runner, which is something Seattle values. And then there's Kenny Bell at Nebraska, who's perhaps the best run-blocking receiver in the draft and ran a 4.42. Not strong, hasn't got long arms, but fast, great vertical, and like I said, the best run blocker as a receiver in the draft, and we know that Seattle values that.
I like Kenny Bell. I don't know anything about him, but he's got a good name. What exactly, and as a whole with the running back class, did either one of you maybe, but did you see anything that sort of stood out that would make you think, well, this is a strong enough class that Melvin Gordon's stock is going to drop, or were that someone that he could be available again at the end of the first round? Do you think that that's a possibility, Rob?
Yes, I think that it's very possible. And I was having a conversation with someone on the blog earlier, and he kind of sparked this thought into my mind that they were talking about, could you trade your 31 pick for a future pick, whether that's a first rounder or get some good value there, and what would it take? And I remember in 2011, Mark Ingram, I think the New England Patriots traded out of the bottom end of the first round, and New Orleans gave up their 2012 first rounder to get Ingram. Why? Because he'd had a great career at Alabama, was very highly rated. I know that it didn't really work out with him until 2014, but Gordon's that similar type of reputation. He's got that real. There's a real buzz around him, and if he falls to 31, and look, his combine workout was not great. Let's be honest. Okay split, okay vertical, not great 40 time. Didn't look as explosive as everybody thought. If he's still there at 31, you could get a pretty decent trade. If John Snyder's looking for a scenario where maybe he can move down, Melvin Gordon dropping to 31 is a real possibility. Just very quickly on the running backs, Danny comes in. He mentioned Mike Davis. He's got a tremendous split. I think he ran a 1.58, which is better than any. I think it was better than any of the other running backs, or maybe David Johnson at Northern Iowa had a similar one. But that is what you look for. And if he can do that at the size that he has, that is special. And the one thing with him as well, I love Draft Breakdown, and everybody will go on there and watch the videos, but there is a tendency sometimes that they'll look at a prospect, find his best 2 or 3 games, and they'll put the videos up there, so you kind of see the best of a prospect. I've seen South Carolina a lot. They're on the TV as well, like Georgia, all the time, and he has some average games as well as some good ones. So there's a lot to like there. And Josh Robinson, I just really, really like, because he's a fantastic pass catcher out of the backfield.
That is an interesting idea about the just completely getting rid of the first, or not getting rid of it, but trading a first for a future first, just based on the fact that you can't really lose when you're at 31. You can't. Right. You can only do one spot worse, so you can only pretty much improve your pick. It's just a matter of whether or not you think you need that guy. So it's kind of difficult to know, like, are the Dallas Cowboys going to be in a position where if Melvin Gordon's going to be there, are they in a position to say, well, we need to save money, we need a legit starting running back, we're going to trade our future first-round pick to the Seahawks to get Gordon because we're not going to re-sign DeMarco Murray? Is there anything as far as the concept of just not drafting anyone in the first round appealing for a first-round pick next year to you, Danny?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be against that necessarily because, I mean, if they can get a first-round pick from it, like you said, it's going to be probably better than where their position is going to be, you know. So with the comp picks that the Seahawks are getting this year, you know, they're probably going to get 4. They're counting on 3, but they're probably going to get 4. You know, they're going to have if they traded their first-round pick, they'd still have 10 picks. So the question is, do they see enough value in the mid-rounds to do that? And I think, you know, if they have 3 or 4 fourth-round picks, then it's definitely a possibility. And I wouldn't necessarily be against it, just based on, you know, how many guys are probably going to be able to make the team. But that said, you know, if they have a corner or a pass rusher that they really, really like at 31, I'm kind of still in that boat where, you know, you might need to be drafting a starter for the cornerback position. So, you know, I don't know if you necessarily want to get a guy who's more of a developmental guy. You might want to get, like, if Marcus Peters falls, for instance, like, that might be a route you want to go, because then you can plug him in and he can play from day one in theory.
Rob, I'm sort of going off the cuff a little bit here. Maybe I don't know if you even thought this far ahead, but do you see next year's draft class as something that's going to be extremely beneficial to have 2 draft picks in the first round? Is there a deep class in a certain way, or a player that you would want to target?
Yes. In a word, yes. It looks like it's going to be a really strong draft next year. And I actually sat down and wrote down a list of names that I thought were, you know, exciting. And I do this every year about this time, a list of exciting players to look out for. And I just got to make a note of it. And it was much longer this year than it was last year. And, you know, there could be a decent... I mean, I've just had a look at the trade in 2011. And Mark Ingram went at 28. So it's, you know, 3 picks ahead of Seattle this year. And New England got their second rounder that year. So they got New Orleans' second round pick, which was 56 overall. And they got the first round selection in 2012. Now, doesn't this just sound like the perfect John Schneider trade? So actually, he's trading down into round 2, which he probably wants to do anyway, and to go that little bit further into the 50s instead of the 40s.
Right.
First round of next year. So you know what?
Wow.
It's unlikely that Melvin Gordon's going to be there at 31, and even if he is, you're going to need somebody who wants to make that kind of a deal. I'm just saying, there's a precedent there for Seattle to maybe move into the back end of round 2, get a first-round pick next year, and it happened for Mark Ingram, a running back. Why won't it happen for Todd Gurley or Melvin Gordon if they're there at 31?
Yeah, and every time someone says, like, well, no one would do that or whatever, no one would do that. No, it keeps happening. Like, we're all sitting here saying, I can't believe the Saints gave up that much. And people would say, it happened. Like, when people think, like, oh, well, it couldn't happen again. No, it will happen again. It'll absolutely happen again. Maybe we won't be that lucky, depending on how you define luck, but it's going to happen again. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen in this exact scenario, but there's going to be GMs out there that develop these ridiculous crushes on players that just wouldn't believe their eyes. Like, you know, and it benefited them last year when Teddy Bridgewater fell to 32 and they were able to trade down and pick up something else that they wanted. Something that's harder to identify as far as drafts go, but something that didn't really go that well for the Seahawks last year was kick returner and punt returner. Jacoby Jones was just released by the Baltimore Ravens, arguably, you know, the best kick returner in the NFL. You know, returning, it's got limited value and limited more so with kicking off from the 35. So, Danny, what do you think about Jacoby Jones as a player? And, you know, everyone's going to say at the right price, but let's just assume the right price. What do you think about Jacoby Jones as far as a different option at receiver and an elite option at kick returner? Something that we thought we had with Percy Harvin, and this would just be sort of a much more subdued version of that.
Yeah, I'm not really I'm not excited about the idea of Jacoby Jones coming to Seattle. I think if the Seahawks did it and they wanted to give him like a league minimum contract where he could come in and compete for the job, then that's one thing. But I don't see them going out and giving him like anything more than that personally. But you never know. I think, I would just rather have them draft a receiver or two in this draft that have a lot of experience returning kicks, and they can just plug him in, as the returner. That said, it was really frustrating watching the whoever was like Doug Baldwin, Paul Richardson, some of these other guys. It was really frustrating watching that this past season. What?
It was a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, it was their return game was atrocious.
When they couldn't figure out what to do in the beginning of the year, and people are fumbling and returning kicks at the one and stuff like that, it was awful. It was the worst. I mean, then that's the whole thing.
Yeah,
is that they've been successful from 2010 on. It seemed like that would be their key to get over the hump was their special teams, and it was absolutely it was hard to watch this year.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Carroll is he's always been big on explosive plays and game-changing plays like that, gap plays, game-altering plays, and so I think there's a chance that the Seahawks could bring in a guy like Jacoby Jones or Ted Ginn, but my initial reaction was nah, pass. But at the same time, then I think back and I'm like, God, the return game was incredibly frustrating to watch this year as a fan, and they just tried 5 guys at it. No one was any good. But at the same time, if you look at the blocking at the All-22 video, the blocking was the problem for the most part. So I don't really know if Jacoby Jones solves that. I think they had so many injuries with their depth guys. They had 14 to 18 dudes on the IR this year by the end of it, and when you're filling in some of the core special teams roles with these rookies or people off the street, or street free agents, then obviously it's just going to cause havoc in that sense. And so I think a big part of the problem was not necessarily the returners, which obviously I don't think they helped anything, but a lot of these guys were getting hit by 4 defenders when they got to the 10-yard line. You know what I mean? Something is wrong here. And to me, the issue. I just don't think that Jacoby Jones is going to solve anything, really, to be honest with you. And I think, if they want to bring him in and have him compete with Brian Walters, then I'm fine with that. But don't give him any sort of big contract, obviously. Or, just anything more than a league minimum probably would be a surprise to me.
I would, yeah. I refuse to blame the blocking only because that would require a lot more critical thinking, and I would just I'd much prefer to just blame it on one person. So.
There were a few instances I watched every kickoff or anything like that, but there were a few instances where I'm like, man, he missed the lane bad, and he would have been gone. But the vast majority, it was 4 dudes were hitting the returner, whether it was Baldwin or Richardson, when they got to the 5 or 10-yard line. It's no returner in the NFL is going to do anything if you've got 4 guys coming free at him. You at least have to give him, 2 or 3 blocks.
Yeah.
Or else he's, you know what I mean? And so at the same, in terms of punting, I don't really know what to do about punting. They need to find a punt returner. And so, I don't know does Jacoby Jones do punt returns too?
I think so.
Well, if he's a good punt returner, that's one thing. If he's just a kick returner, I probably should have researched this, obviously, but
no. Rob, do you see options as far as in the draft of guys that are just mind-blowing at kick returns and punt returns, or do you have thoughts as far as Jacoby Jones?
Well, Jones had 3 I'm just looking at his stats now, 3 fumbles on punt returns last year, and no touchdowns, and 1 40-yard punt return. So he's definitely
awesome.
So pretty good. So an upgrade, basically.
He's definitely a better kick returner. I think I agree with Danny completely that I just think that if it was for me, I wouldn't waste a resource on that. There are players in the draft who can return kicks. I want to go all in on Julius Thomas instead. I think that the one thing the offense needs is a really dynamic big target, and I think he's number 3 behind Gronk and Graham in the league in terms of move tight ends and mismatches. I'd love to see some money invested there so that it takes the pressure off you needing to go big and early on the receiver position. And what that means is that later on you can look at guys who you can develop as receivers over maybe 1 or 2 years, but can perhaps start as a kick returner early on. And that is why I like Trey McBride because he returned kicks for William and Mary and did a very good job at it. Now, he's not Percy Harvin, but he's going to do more than just fair catch the ball every week like Brian Walters did. I mean, he took a position on the roster every week to basically be the fair catch specialist. So you can swap that out and get somebody in who can do that. I mean, Nelson Aguilar is at USC is a tremendous and a very underrated athlete. He's fantastic. Go on, everyone should Google him. I've seen this already. You should Google Nelson Aguilar dunk. And you should see him dunking a basketball because he might only be 6 foot and 198 pounds, but he can dunk a basketball better than a guy who's 6'5". And he can also return kicks. There is a long list of players. I mean, if you took Philippe Dorset, he's a 4.33 runner. Develop him into being a kick returner. I think that Stephon Diggs, as a late rounder, could develop into a kick returner. I think there's a whole list of receivers that are good.
Kenny Bell, right?
Kenny Bell, Ty Montgomery could probably do it. Devin Smith is a great gunner, but could also be a kick returner as well because he's got the speed. There's a lot of players in this draft. Rashad Perriman could probably do it. He's big, but he could probably do it if you were desperate. So there's a lot of options there. I would not. I mean, as much as I really like Jacoby Jones. I'd love to see his touchdown celebration at CenturyLink every now and again, but I think I'd rather save some money and go the draft route.
Yeah, that's for those that wanted to Google it. It's Nelson Aguilar, Agholor, and then a dunk. As far as other players, and we talked a little about running back, we talked a little about USC. Reggie Bush is another guy that's available all of a sudden. He didn't come over as far as the last time he was a free agent after the Saints let him go, or when the Dolphins, I mean. So there were other opportunities, and it's easy to make that connection. But on the other hand, there probably is an interesting connection as far as Reggie Bush and whether he could help out, or even it's tough to know exactly even if Reggie Bush, if this is the end of his career, because he didn't do very much last year. He is getting, 29 years old, I believe. And as far as, connections, I mean, is he better at this stage in his career than, say, Justin Forsett? So, Danny, do you have any idea if Reggie Bush is someone that you'd want on the Seahawks? Is he someone that we just sort of talk about something, and it's really not that much of a big deal whether he signs or doesn't sign?
Well, my question is, I don't really know how. I wonder what Pete Carroll and his relationship is these days, if anything, because they kind of left, under tough circumstances with Reggie ultimately sort of giving back his Heisman and all that crap. But I think, it's kind of like Jacoby Jones. If they can get him for really cheap and like a really team-friendly deal, I'm not necessarily going to be against it. But to me, he's not like the answer or whatever. He's not like, he wouldn't be like a guy that you'd want to like go out and spend a bunch of money on to be like the X factor in the offense. I think, like you said, he's 29, getting a little older. I think if they wanted to bring him in as sort of like punt return specialist, he hasn't done it lately, but he did at USC, and Pete Carroll seemed to love him for that. And then, as like an outlet guy out of the back, it's more of like a pass catcher than a runner. Necessarily going to like poo-poo that right now, but my list. I mean, if he wanted to come here and if he wanted to do it on the cheap, then I'm
Rob, what
big time free agent that I want to go after.
Rob, as far as Reggie Bush's skill set, and also sort of an interesting thought as far as how much the NFL has changed since Reggie Bush was drafted in 2006. Is there any way what the skill set that he brought at USC, was he overrated, or did he just underperform compared to what he should have become when he was drafted? Because it seems like now a lot of people look back on it and think, he was just a little overrated. Or do you not see tape like Reggie Bush and what he was able? Do you just not see what he does very often as far as when he was at USC?
I think the big problem that he had was New Orleans have not been able to run the ball effectively for years. And when they brought him in and he was there, and they kept going to this running back by committee approach, I don't think they ever truly bought into him being, the guy. And maybe they were a little surprised that he was going to be there, and they took him. I think maybe once they got him, they just didn't know what to do with him. And then I think Detroit had a much better idea of how to handle him and to use him, and have got some really good production out of him when he was healthy. But then that's the other problem with Reggie Bush, isn't it? He struggles to stay healthy. I've always really liked him, but I just don't see how he would fit in Seattle, because if you put him on the field instead of Marshawn Lynch, everybody pretty much knows it's going to be a pass out, that he's going to be an option out of the backfield. And I just feel like maybe that ship has sailed for him. I quite like the little chemistry that Seattle has got going at running back, and if they can get Lynch signed back up, and Robert Turbin, I thought, took a real step forward in 2014 and looked really good. And Lord knows what's going to happen with Christian Michael. I mean, we're talking about kick returners. Why on earth has he not won a job as a kick returner? He can do it. He did it at Texas A&M. It pretty much is a review of how little trust they have in Christian Michael, that he's never, ever been considered for a kick return role. But maybe the light switch is on this year. Maybe they can get something out of him. And if not, there's going to be similar options. I mean, we were talking about Josh Robinson earlier. He's a fantastic catcher out the backfield. And there are running backs who can do the Bush role. Maybe not as explosive as Bush, but younger and cheaper.
Yeah, and it would really be interesting to see if Christian Michael, if he has any sort of trade value, and if he's not going to be around. There's not the only precedent is pretty much just trading him for another guy that was drafted in the same year that also sort of is disappointing. And I don't know if that's something that's on the horizon, but it's something that I've been sort of looking out for. And it really also depends, I guess, on Marshawn Lynch, and if he signs a new deal, and it seems like that's something that could happen. But as far as the first round, Rob, is there so far? I mean, you're still working through all of the data that we have. But I do kind of wonder also when you talk about Reggie Bush and the top of the first round, and in that year it seemed like the Saints, they sort of felt pressure almost to take him, like, oh, well, everyone's so high on this guy. And when you said they were surprised he didn't go number one to the Texans. Do you think that's something that could sort of happen with a Marcus Mariota, where the Titans or someone else says, oh, well, this guy's supposedly supposed to be good, so we'll just go with him? Is Mariota still your number one, or do you see James Winston being the true number one there? What do you sort of see happening in the next 2 months with those two guys?
I think that Jameis Winston's going to go Jameis Winston, I keep calling him Jameis. Jameis is going to go number one, because they just get a vibe, don't you? And you got Cam Newton at the combine in 20, and he was going to be the guy. And you get the same vibe with Winston, and he owned the combine. He was fantastic in his press conference when he was on the NFL Network. He was sensational, the way, the confidence with which he spoke. The big thing is, and I think Mike Mayock mentioned it this week, is that you've still got to be scared of the guy, because guess what? Johnny Manziel did exactly the same thing a year ago. It was just brilliant, said everything the right way, and said he was going to do this, that, and the other. And obviously it was all for nothing in the end. And trusting Jameis Winston is going to be something that I wouldn't want to do, but it looks as if Tampa Bay is going to go that way. Aren't Tennessee just the weirdest franchise out there? No, I mean, they were hopeless last year, and somehow the GM and the coach survives. The GM, who was Rustin Webster, Seattle, just seems to have, it's like a cat, he seems to have 9 lives. And he'd blow it with Jake Locker. He appointed Mike Mularkey and it was the other guy. He's the offensive line coach, isn't it? They appointed him and he failed. He appointed Ken Wisenhunt and he goes 2-14. And here they are again, and now it looks like at number 2, rather than go for the quarterback, and their quarterback situation is hopeless, rather than go for Mariota and build around him, they're going to pass on him, because Ken Wisenhunt, it doesn't fit Ken Wisenhunt's identity. And that 6th-round Zach Mettenberger does it. Zach Mettenberger, who's got feet like cement and just honks it downfield, is the guy that they're going to go with. And they're not going to take Marcus Mariota, who's Colin Kaepernick with a brain. And it's unbelievable. I mean, I like Leonard Williams, fine, take him if you want. they're going to be picking number 2, number 3, number 1 again next year. And they're still not going to have a quarterback, and they're going to have Leonard Williams instead of Marcus Mariota. And if I was Ruston Webster and Ken Whisenhunt, I'd be thinking, hey, maybe if we draft this quarterback, it'll buy us a little bit more time. Well, they're not going to get that time because they're going to pass on Mariota and take a defensive lineman, it seems, instead. And that, for me, would be a horrible mistake.
It is really interesting when you think about when people, you really got to have that vision like down the line, and it's like coaches that draft quarterbacks at the top, they almost are never around for very long because it's like, yeah, you're not good, you're bad. That's why you're drafting at the top, and then you're not gonna. Usually, a quarterback isn't gonna come in there and make you good in that first year. So really, to do something for Ken Whisenhunt, it's really just gonna be like, well, Ken Whisenhunt, really you're probably doing it for the next guy. You're doing it for the next coach because it's hard to envision the Titans not being terrible next year. So it's sort of interesting as far as, they can draft a guy like Mariota and maybe improve, but you got to improve. And it's like when you look at someone like Gus Bradley and it's like they draft Blake Bortles to go be his quarterback and then they're still really terrible. And if they don't improve this year, then it's going to be the next guy and the next quarterback. So, Danny, did you have any sort of thoughts as far as what you've seen from Mariota? Are you focusing sort of on that draft and what you think as far as the two quarterbacks at the top?
I haven't watched either of those guys at all. So I can't really offer much of an analysis on it. I agree with Rob, though. I think it's weird how in Tennessee they've sort of been terrible for a long time, and they're just going to, kind of run with the 6th round pick in Mettenberger, or whatever round he was, later round pick in Mettenberger, and kind of just hope it works out. It's like, to me, you can't succeed unless you have a good quarterback, period. Like, you might get lucky and have a dominant defense, but you're still going to be kind of like middle of the road. Like, look at Texas, or not Texas, but Houston. It's like, you can have a really good really good defense, really strong run game, blah, blah, blah. If you don't have a good quarterback, you're just going to, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be mediocre or terrible.
I mean,
so
definitely
yeah.
If you think Mariota or Winston, definitely if you think that those guys are going to be franchise quarterbacks, then that's definitely the guy that you should take. Then there's situations where the team is sitting there feeling desperate because they're like, well, everyone needs a franchise quarterback, so this Bortles guy is here, so we're just going to take him. And then it's just like, now you've just got a bad quarterback. And, maybe Bortles works out, but if you're not certain about, these guys, then really just like with Carroll, then you build the team. And then, you draft the tackle and the safety, and you try and build a team and then take 5-6 shots at something that's better. I'm kind of curious, Rob, if you see a 5th round or a 3rd round or 4th round quarterback that if a team like Tennessee takes Leonard Williams, maybe they take this other quarterback to compete with Zach Mettenberger. Is there anyone that you sort of like later on in the draft?
No, it's a horrible quarterback draft, and people are trying to talk up Brett Hundley, but no, not for me. His tape never improved year on year at UCLA. Bryce Petty, the Senior Bowl really put me off him. The Senior Bowl game, I just no. And there isn't anybody. I mean, you are looking at a 2-quarterback draft. And the thing is I've just got this bad feeling that Tennessee are going to watch Philadelphia trade up, and they're going to spend big to get into maybe if Tennessee passed them, they're going to try and get into the top 5 to get Marcus Mariota, because that is what Philadelphia needs. They can go Byron Maxwell and go big in free agency to get a quarterback. Their other big need. Then go up and get Mariota. And if you are Tennessee, you're watching Chip Kelly, who knows Mariota better than anybody else, and he's selling the farm to get this guy. How could you live with yourself? Because if there's one person about Marcus Mariota, it's Chip Kelly. And if he ends up going up and trading him, and you're sat there with Leonard Williams, you're thinking, yeah, maybe this guy's better than we thought. It seems like it's a scheme preference. They don't think Mariota's going to fit the scheme there. If that's why they pass on him, then fine. But you are going to live or die, as Ken Whisenhunt did in Arizona, with the cluster of ranked bad quarterbacks they tried there, from Max Hall to John, whatever his name was, and all the others that, if he's going to, this is maybe his last chance to be a head coach. And he's doing exactly the same thing that he did in Arizona all over again. And I would draft Mariota because he's going to be mobile. He's going to be spectacular. He's smart. I think he may take a bit of time, like Kaepernick. Maybe needs the year like Kaepernick had. But when he gets used to stuff and you give him some weapons and an O-line, he's going to be.
It would be really interesting to see just how much the Eagles would have to give up in order to move up that high to get anyone. But the Falcons did it once upon a time with Julio Jones. They traded a lot. They got to 6, but yeah, that would be an interesting draft. It seems like it. Do you think it's going to be an interesting draft this year, Rob?
I do. I think it's going to be a draft where Seattle trades down from 31. I think it's inevitable. I think they are going to pick guys that people maybe don't know that much about, and they're not going to care again, like usual. And I think they're going to draft a lot in rounds 2 to 4, where I think there's a lot of value this year. Don't think there's much value. I reckon we get about 15 to 18 first-round graded players, which means the value at about 20 or 22 is going to be exactly the same as it is at 45. So if you're at 31, you might as well trade down. So you might as well get a couple of extra picks, get into the second round. I think they're gonna go big on receiver. I think they'll take a couple of those. I could see McBride. I could see Darren Waller at Georgia Tech, who's a Vincent Jackson clone physically, just needs time. It took Jackson 4 years, by the way, to have a decent year in San Diego. So maybe Waller comes in as a project. And then I think they're going to go a couple of cornerbacks, a couple of offensive linemen, loads of athletic offensive linemen who can play guard in this draft, so they shouldn't worry about replacing James Carpenter. And I think they'll probably end up taking a linebacker at some stage and a safety. And I think they're going to go for quantity over maybe some of the big names again, and I think they'll be just fine. I think they'll hit on this draft. I think they're going to have a good draft.
Well, I would certainly hope so. I think that it would be a very nice, welcome thing to come out of the draft feeling pretty positive about all the things they did, and I don't see that being a problem. Danny, any final thoughts on the Combine or Pete Prisco or the draft? I think we mostly just want to know about Pete Prisco.
No, I mean he's a good guy. No,
he's your best friend, basically, right?
Yeah, we're best friends now, pretty much. I don't know. I would just echo a lot what Rob said. I think the Seahawks will probably trade out of 31 unless there's someone that falls. John Schneider was kind of making jokes about it at the Combine. In fact, about he said something along the lines of 31's available if anyone wants to call or whatever, and he kind of looked around in the way that he does, and so. I think I agree with Rob. I think pick up a couple picks and if they get some good comp picks in the 4th round, I think they could really clean up in the 2nd through 4th rounds and even into the 5th round before it starts to taper off. Then they start picking athletes that might end up being good players at some point. It's like. And I guarantee you they're going to pick 1 or 2 guys that everyone is like, what in the hell? Rob, did you even know who Jimmy Staton was last year?
No, but I was really pleased to hear a guy called Staton draft.
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
It's I'd never even heard of him.
No, never heard of him. And same with Pinkins as well. And
yeah.
There'll probably be a couple of those at least.
Yeah.
But then there'll also be guys who go, oh yeah. We expected that, which is Garrett Scott last year. We expected that, and it wasn't a big surprise. So athletic. I think we all kind of thought that Kevin Pierre-Louis would be an option, and Kevin Norwood. We all talked about Kevin Norwood being an option.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be some guys that we go, yeah, okay. I mean, Jordan Hill was another one the year before. We spoke about him. So there's going to be guys that we go, yep, and there's going to be guys that we go, does that guy even play football, or is that? So, that's the way it's always going to be with this team.
My surprise last year, honestly, I mean, I had never heard of Staton, so that was obviously a surprise, but I was kind of surprised that they liked Cassius Marsh. He didn't seem to me to fit the Seahawks, MO in terms of his athleticism or his position or anything like that. I kind of looked at him like a D-end, but, obviously they see him as a hybrid rusher, so that's obviously why they got him, but I'm sure there will be a couple guys in there that I'm like, really? I never would have guessed that they'd be interested in a player like that. Kind of like Paul Richardson, actually.
A great 10-yard split, Cassius Marsh.
Yeah.
you could see the size that he had and the split, and then you watch the tape and the physicality and the attitude that he played. You could understand why. But you're right, he didn't run a grade 40. I think it was like a 4.84 runner or something like that.
Right.
Yep, it should be. I think it'll be a lot easier to know exactly. Looking forward to free agency, basically. I know we talked a little bit about Julius Thomas, or some of the guys that they could look at if they feel like they have the cap room. But once March 10th gets here, usually those dominoes fall pretty quick, and we should have a better idea of what needs the Seahawks have going into the draft. So I think that concludes episode 3 of Reel in the Field Gulls. And if there's anything else, just make sure to subscribe. You can subscribe on iTunes by looking for the Field Gulls podcast, and then every Thursday this will come out. Of course, you can also watch it, the YouTube feed on fieldgulls.com, and it's uploaded to Blog Talk Radio for a download link as well. So this is Reel in the Field Gulls. Thank you, Rob, for dropping by. Rob Staton.
No, thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it. Any opportunity to talk Seahawks and draft in England is taken and appreciated.
Maybe if you changed your Twitter handle to like Staton My Case, then people would know how it's pronounced. You'd be like, hey.
I didn't let me do it at work, but I'll put that to them.
Okay. Thanks again, and thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next. You will hear us next Thursday. Goodbye.
Talk that shit, but they ain't really about that life. Put them bands on